Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who may not know, my name is Lisa Poff. I'm the project coordinator with the Indiana Deaf-Blind Services Project. I want to welcome you to today's virtual workshop, Communication for Learners Who are Prelinguistic. It's an introductory workshop with Nancy Steele. And just as a quick reminder, this is an ongoing training. So you have today's workshop. When you finish today, there'll be some homework to do, and then we'll have individual team meetings that we'll schedule every month through the month of May. I'm going to turn this over to you, Nancy, and you can introduce yourself and tell them what you want them to know or don't want them to know about yourself.
That's a little scary, but that's fine. Hi, I'm Nancy Steele, and I live in Tennessee. So there's one thing you don't know about me, or maybe you don't, and who cares, but I live in Tennessee. I was a teacher of the deaf in Kentucky for 17 years. And then I went on to work at the National Center on Deaf-Blindness for almost 15 years. In the last 4 years or so, I've been working kind of as a consultant and doing my own thing. And one of those things I've done is I've come to Indiana a couple of times and done some face-to-face trainings. But this is our first time to do this kind of venue and this kind of ongoing or follow-up training. So we're giving it a shot and seeing how it goes. I've had a lot of experience around deaf-blind learners. When I was at the National Center, I was in charge of like 7 states in the Southeast. So I would go in and help the deaf-blind projects in whatever they were doing in their states. And one of the things that I always loved in particular was going into classrooms and really looking at kids and getting down on the floor with kids and really understanding their communication. And communication is like one of my main loves. The other love that I have is literacy. And when I was at NCDB, we did I was the lead on literacy. And we developed a website around literacy instruction and stuff. So lately, I've been working a lot with communication and developing a few things with some friends of mine in West Virginia around the communication matrix. So we're going to be using some of those materials a little bit in this training, but we'll also be talking a lot just about your learner and around teams, because I feel like it's got to be the team. And the reason why we feel like it's got to be the team is because when we are designing instruction for our learners with deaf-blindness, and we really have to, everybody has to be on the same page. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have the team. It's not always, it doesn't always have to have every member of the team at everything, but they certainly, there has to be some kind of mechanism where everybody on the team gets all of the information, because it's really important to do everything in the same way with kids. And what I'm going to do now is share my screen with you guys, and we're going to talk a little bit just about communication. And I wanted to, I can't start it without giving some kind of overview about communication. And then from there, we'll move into more about the communication matrix. Oh, before we do that, before I start that, if each team will real quickly just let me know in the chat pod. I know Noah's team has a communication matrix. It's a little old, is that correct? And if so, would you all do a communication matrix? Would you feel comfortable doing it between now and when we meet, or do you want to do that as our first meeting? It doesn't matter to me. It's just logistics, and I'm going to ask that of everybody. If you have a current communication matrix that has been done, I know 2 students have them that from 18. Okay, so if your guys' staff, if you want to do a matrix, Okay, great. Beautiful. So Elias, y'all will upload it, update it. Michael's team will update. Noah's isn't too old. Okay, that's fine. All right. So everybody, do you feel comfortable in doing that? There's the other piece, because some people have never done a matrix, but somebody on the team does feel comfortable enough to go through and do the matrix. Is that right? Yay. Okay. And we can talk about that later. Yay. Well, that's going to help us for the first meeting when we're together. Okay, we're going to start with some general instructions today. And if you would rather, on our first meeting when we're together as teams, when we're meeting in our breakout teams, if you would rather wait and do the matrix together so that we have more input, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me. It's mostly your team decide which way we're going to go in that first meeting. Okay, we have lots and lots to talk about in any meeting. So either way you want to do it is fine with me. Okay, so today we're going to just start with a quick overview of communication and just where I'm coming from. And then we will talk a little bit about the matrix. And then we're going to talk about logistics about these meetings that we're going to set up for afterwards. Okay. So anything else that you need or want to talk about in that, just do in the chat pod. Why is this not there? Okay. Okay. So why do we need to communicate? And I've got a few quotes in here that I feel like are from people that really understand communication, and I highly respect and feel like they have a just have been around for a long time. One of them is from Barbara Miles with Remarkable Conversations. And it's without communication, we become so isolated from our fellow human beings and cannot form meaningful relationships. And if you think about our learners with deaf-blindness, they are isolated. A lot of times they don't have those partners to communicate. So you have to think about how that must feel to feel that isolated. Then Kat Strimmel, who was my old boss at the National Center, said through communication, children make changes in their world. They can express their wants and needs, and they can make choices. And that's so empowering to be able to make choices. It really makes a difference for kids. And communication is everyone's business. That's why we have the team set up for this. It's not just the SLP that needs to be responsible. Communication is the basis of all other skills and for interaction between students and all others. And then the other quote is, communication is crucial to development in all areas, you know, that academic and social. So it's everybody's business. Even, you know, when the OT comes in or the PT, they have to coordinate how they're going to do that message, just like if we're all going to use finished, or are we going to say all done? Or whatever way that we're going to say it, we all need to say those same words. We all need to say it in the same way, or to present whatever we're going to do all in the same way, because otherwise it's like asking that child to speak 5 different foreign languages. Because if we're going at them and I'm saying, oh, finished, and then Lisa comes in and she says, oh, all done, then that child really has to say, okay, that really means the same thing. So that's one of the reasons why we have to do that. Okay, not being able, this is from Susan Bashinsky, who's done quite a bit of work on prelinguistic students with prelinguistic students. And she says, not being able to speak is not the same as not having anything to say. And that's true. That's so true. We kind of overlook our kids if they can't communicate or have no formal way of communicating. Then sometimes we overlook them and we keep going and we just assume that they know what we're talking about or what we're doing. That's how learned helplessness comes in. So I want to start us off by talking about incidental learning. And that's very important with these kids. When 90% or even greater of everything we've ever learned in our lives, we've learned incidentally. Now stop and think about that. When you walk into a restaurant, you immediately with your eyes sweep the area and you know whether or not you have to wait for the hostess to seat you. You have to form a line so that you can order at the counter, or you have to get your tray and go along in cafeteria style, all in like a matter of nanoseconds. You sweep your eyes, and because of your prior experience, you know how to do that, and you know what's expected of you. Same thing when we go into church, if we go into a store, we go anywhere or do anything. Mostly it's because prior experience we've done the things or something similar, so we know what to do because of that, or because we just sweep our eyes and we look around, we see what others are doing, and that's how we learn. I was 4th out of 5 kids. So I learned pretty early what not to do because my older siblings weren't doing it. If they weren't doing it, then I knew it must not be something I was going to do or should do because I'd get in trouble. Now, sometimes they would set me up, of course, but you have to stop and think about that's how we've learned so many things that we know. Then the second, so that's the biggest chunk of this triangle. The middle chunk of it is secondary. And that's when we listen to a person teach or present information. That's your schoolwork. That's all of your college. That's all of your school. That's you listening to me today. That's just how much of everything we have in our brain that we've learned through school or those kind of things. So stop and look at that and think about that. Then direct instruction or hands-on experiences, it's the tiniest little piece because we really don't do a whole lot of hands-on experience. We may with younger kids, we may have them do manipulatives and stuff like that, but for the most part, very little of it. But our sensory challenges turn learning just upside down. So our children with deaf-blindness or our kids with deaf-blindness, what we have to do is think of it as absolutely the opposite. And that means that very tiny little pieces of incidental learning occurs because they don't have the vision, or they're getting partial information from their vision, or it may be distorted, or just it doesn't occur. Then secondary learning is very difficult. So most of their things that we teach them has to be hands-on experiences because that's the best way for them to learn. And then we have to put it in the right way, because if you think about how many experiences you've had and how many concepts you developed without anyone teaching you. But now we have this student that all of a sudden we have to teach them all of these concepts that we take for granted. We don't even think about teaching them to typically developing kids, or for the most part, a lot of kids, because we assume they already have it. With this population, we have to assume they don't have it. And so that's why we really have to stop and think about those experiences, giving them experience, and then also being very systematic in it so that when they are developing these concepts, that they're able to really develop them in a systematic way, and it goes in their brain that way. Okay, so what is communication? Communication is interactions. It's just that exchange between two people or more. It's that connection. That's what I think I love most about working with kids and getting down in the floor, is to get that connection. You know, they may not know me and understand who I am or what I'm doing, but by the time that we finish, we've made that connection. That's what I'm thriving for. That's what I'm looking for. I want that connection with them, and I want them to be able to get those connections. Communication's that back and forth between two or more people. It's an exchange of a message. It's a social act. Think about this past year when we've all been so isolated and away from each other, and how we've really, really thrive on just having that communication with somebody else so that you don't feel so isolated. So some of the ground rules for communication is all people communicate. Every one of us, all of us, I don't care who it is, they communicate. Communication begins at birth. So from that very first moment that the doctor catches us and we're put with our mom, communication begins then. And it doesn't stop until the day we die. And our responses to people with disability can help or hinder communication development. Now, I want you to sit with that sentence for just a minute, because that's a huge responsibility, and it happens. And it's not intentional on our part by any means, but sometimes we hinder that communication development. So we have to be very careful. And of course, behavior is communication. That's the whole reason why we're going with the matrix, is because it looks at behavior as communication. And so that's one of the things that's so highly important about this. Okay, so what's not necessary to communicate? Because so many times, and I've been in lots and lots of classrooms all over the country, and what I hear from teachers all over is, oh, well, you know, we've got to get cause and effect before we can't really get any kind of communication going until he gets cause and effect. Or he can't imitate me, or we got to match things, you know, we've got to get that AT equipment. What can we do? He can't talk, so we can't communicate. I hear all of those different excuses, but none of those things are necessary in order to communicate. What are the elements? We need a sender, we need a receiver, we need a means of expression, so a way to communicate, and a topic. And unfortunately, when I go into all these classrooms, a lot of times the topic is not, you know, it's the pureed food or the potty trips. And that's not a lot of things to really, I don't want to discuss either one of those things. So I can't imagine that the students I serve do. So we've got to come up with things for them to talk about, things for them to get excited about. So what else is required? It's that interaction. It's that sender and receiver, that turn taking. And what is turn taking? That's that foundation for communication. You know, when I'm talking in a not in this venue, of course, but when I am having that interaction, when I am communicating with somebody, usually it's I'm talking and then I hush and listen to what they're saying. And we do that turn-taking exchange, that back and forth, and responding to each other, listening, all of that interaction. We have to have something to talk about. A lot of times we talk about the weather or just different things that are going on. Right now it's COVID, and how are we all surviving? So we have to have something to talk about. We have to have a reason to communicate. And sometimes we make it so convenient for our kids, and we're so right there on top of everything that they never have a reason to communicate because we've gotten it all taken care of for them. So sometimes it's that getting something for them. If, setting that table and not having a fork or not having the straw to put in their drink, something like that, where they have to ask for it. Something that, something that they don't like. Persuading. There's that reason to communicate. And then the last piece is they have to have some form of the communication, be it body language, be it facial expressions, vocalizations, words, devices, whatever it is, sign language, doesn't matter. It's that form that we have to have in order to understand that there is communication going on. So in building that foundation for communication, we have to, it's not just about communication. We've got to have all of these things in place. All of this makes that foundation for communication. And we're going to go through each one of these. First, it's that trusting relationship. And guys, I know that we're all in education, and we automatically assume that all kids trust us. Oh, well, I don't have that problem. Elias loves me. He trusts me. Well, how do we know that? We just assume because we're in a school and because we're loving creatures and we are nurturing and all that good stuff that kids naturally trust us. But see, we don't think about their prior experiences. And sometimes these kids started out in the NICU. And that's not the way that all of us typically start out and have that trusting relationship and that bond with your parents at the first, and so that you develop that trusting relationship that comes with it. Sometimes, nurses are very trusting people too, but they also have things like syringes and needles that hurt, and they do procedures that hurt. And it's not that, they're actually trying to save the child's life, but that baby doesn't know that. And that can then put that startle in there. And those things come from the NICU. They go forward with those kids. And sometimes those behaviors that we see with kids, those self-stim behaviors, they start down as early as the NICU. So the other thing I'm going to say about trusting relationships before I move on is, now that we are in COVID and have been for a while, and as we move our kids back in and start really getting them back to where we're seeing them every day and having those routines and everything, we really are going to have to, I think, do a gut check on that trusting relationship when we start getting kids back. Because think about what you yourself have gone through and how your routines have all been busted, and lots of craziness that has happened in the last year because of COVID. And then, and even though why we're doing it and what we're doing, and maybe you don't have a real good grasp on why it has to be this way, but at least you can understand it. Think about these guys, and they don't have the language. We don't have the language to explain it to them. So I've had a lot of students with deaf-blindness taking trips, field trips to nowhere, and doing all kinds of things like that just to keep them happy at home, because there's been lots of problems. And I'm sure you all know better than I do some of those problems. So I want us to really think about that trusting relationship and what we need to do to gain that and keep that. The next piece is that availability for learning. And what I say about that is, what I mean by that is that there are those internal and external factors that sometimes happen. And maybe if it's an external factor, if it's hot or it's the lighting is off or all kinds of different things like that, those factors that can really, the buzzing of the heater that we don't necessarily hear or that we've, discarded, it doesn't even, until somebody brings it up, we don't really think about that. But if the kid has a hearing aid and all of a sudden that heater comes on and it's bzzz in their ear, then that overrides anything else we're trying to do with them. So there, we have to think about those internal factors. Maybe the kid just had seizures. Maybe we have to make sure that they're available because of that. Maybe we're not getting them at the time of day when they're really alert and ready for good instruction. So that availability for learning piece, that's that sensory piece. That's that making sure that, maybe they're so wigged out like this that we have to get them calmed down in order to get their attention so that we can do things with them. The consistency of partners is what I was talking about earlier in that finished or all done, all of that, so that everybody on the team is consistent and we're all doing things in the same way. Routines, I think, as far as this population, is the best way to get us started. We're all, think about your routines and think about how they've been busted in this past year. And it's been bad. It's been horrible. And that's that feeling of disjointedness that we feel because our routines have been busted. We were so used to getting up in the morning, getting dressed, getting kids ready, going out the door, going to school, and going about our day, and all of a sudden then we can't, and then you're having to learn how to work Zoom, how to do this, how to do that. So all of your routines have been busted, but you've been able to adjust because you had routines to begin with, and you know how to make new routines. And so hopefully now you're settled down a little bit more. Of course, it's ever changing in this past year, so we're all living on edge. And when we think about it, that goes back into our feelings of, because our routines have been busted. And it goes right into that trusting relationship, because what are these kids doing? They're feeding off of us. And if we're in a frenzy, or in the home, moms and dads are frenzied because of routines being busted and not understanding, oh, what am I going to do with the kids? I've still got to work, but these kids are supposed to be doing school, and so everybody is like this, and our kids are like that too, only because they're feeding off of us. We are a direct connection to what's going on, and so they don't maybe understand it, but they're feeding into our sense of angst. That responsive and supportive environment means that do we have them positioned in a way that they're comfortable and that they're ready to learn and can learn? Thinking about that positioning and making sure that we're responsive, especially kids that are in a lower, just those reflexive points in communication. If they're in that stage of just looking at their behaviors, then we got to be responsive. We've got to be right there, and we're reading their behaviors and we're applying things to their behaviors. So we've got to be responsive. It's that time and we've got to wait for those responses. And sometimes in that wait, we turn to get something, and that's when they do their response and we miss it. And if they don't get some kind of response from it, then we cause them to shut down. So we have to stop and think about that being just as much as important as what we're doing interaction wise. And the last piece of building that foundation is the individual's interest. If I talk about things that are of interest to them, or we do things that they really like, we're going to get their attention a lot more than if we're doing things that are on our agenda. So sometimes, in order to start good communication with these kids and really get them going, we got to go where they are, and we got to go with their interest. I've worked with a kid for years who loved a good cookie sheet, and she would sit and self-stem with that. She'd put it on the bridge of her nose and flip it this way, then she'd flip it that way, and she'd go on and on with the cookie sheet for hours and hours and be totally entertained. Well, cookie sheets are all fine and good. That's not exactly something I love. But in order for me to get to her, I had to get down on that floor and play with that cookie sheet with her to get her to a place where she understood what I was doing. You know, without that vision and hearing, we actually have to teach kids how to play. We have to teach them what to do with these toys. So often we've got all these toys and we give them to them and they flip them over their shoulders because they don't know what to do with them, because once again, they haven't seen it. They don't have that incidental learning piece. So they don't know what to do with it, and it means nothing. Shelley with the cookie sheet, her background was that she spent the first 2 years of her life in a hospital bed. And what are they? They're those big cages with the metal sheets, the metal things around them. And she spent lots of time with her mouth up against it, doing all kinds of stuff like that. So metal, and that cold metal was her friend. That was something that interested her. So we have to stop and think about their interest. Okay, so that brings us to the matrix, and I'm glad that all of you all have at least a copy of a matrix. We're going to just talk briefly about the matrix. I'm not going to get into big time. When we go into our individual teams, that's when we will dive in a little more, I think, if you want, depending on the team and what your needs are. The communication matrix is for individuals. I put children is on there, but actually it's from birth through death as far for severe communication impairments. It doesn't matter what the age is. It assesses expressive communication skills that are typically developed in the first 2 years of life. And it looks for 4 reasons to communicate and 7 levels of competence. There are 3 ways to get it. One is a hard paper copy that they started out with 1,000 years ago, and they revised it a few times. And you can still get that downloadable as a downloadable PDF at the Design to Learn store if you so desired. I think you can download that still. There's also a Spanish version of that. And then there's an online. They also, after that, the first one was kind of very clinical and used by SOPs. And the other one is, then they made one for parents. And it was much more user-friendly. It just, same exact information, but they did it in more of a user-friendly for parents. So that one is also available. And then they have an online version, which I'm assuming most of you all have used or your teams have. Communication Matrix used to be a grant, and you used to be able to go on to their website and you could do the matrix and save all your different ones. Now they've changed just in the past couple of weeks. And if you're a parent, I think you can do it up to 5 times in a year free. If not, you can do a few that are free. After that, then they start charging you. And so school systems, there's like a package deal that you could do. It's all available on their website, and they just changed that. So y'all might want to think about that or look at that. Why do I like the matrix? Well, first of all, it focuses on what the child can do or the person can do. I really like that instead of looking at all that they can't do. I think that we spend so much time on that. And especially when we get into IEP meetings and we start talking about all the things that are deficits with kids. So I really like that it's focusing on what they can, and then we build on that. It also gives the family and professionals just a broader definition of communication. It's not so cut and dried. I really think that families can understand it a little better, and they're giving you pieces of it. If you're doing it, ideally you would do it together so that you're getting information kind of holistically, because if you think about it, we're different people in different places, and why wouldn't our kids be the same way? You know, when I go to church, I'm quite different than if I'm out with my girlfriends, you know? So we act differently and we say different things in different places, and our kids do the same thing. It provides that roadmap for intervention. I also like that. What I've found with it though, unfortunately, is a lot of teams will use it, but then they put that nice little thing in the folder and move on. And I'm working with some folks right now. We're developing some tools and resources for each level, so that if a kid is a level 1, we've got a PowerPoint that has all kinds of intervention strategies and things that you can do for that person. And then we've done that for each one of the levels. It's not out yet, but you guys in this are going to be using pieces of that. We're still developing, so you're seeing some of these things fresh. We have, you're kind of almost guinea pigs. So we want to make sure that you give us feedback, please, on any of the materials that we're using. It also helps to determine what important skills are missing. So therefore, it helps in developing those IEP goals. I think it also gives that clear and concise visual picture. So it's really nice to be able to see that picture when we get that graph at the end that shows where this kid is and what they're doing. And then it also helps just look at behavior in a different way. Because as a technical assistance person, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten calls from school systems saying, oh, we got to have you in here because he's got behavior. Oh, there's behavior. Oh, this kid has the worst behavior. And for me, behavior then means communication. So for me, that means, oh, we got to go in and we got to address communication and what needs to happen with that. Okay, so the reasons on the matrix to communicate, there are only 4 that they look at. And this is, remember, the first 2 years of life, what typically developing, what we all went through for the first 2 years. So the first thing is to refuse things you don't want. And that's usually a very basic thing that we all do or have the capacity to refuse things you don't have. To obtain something that you want. To engage in social interactions. And to provide or seek information. So those are the 4 main reasons for communication according to the matrix. And then there are all the different pre-symbolic or pre-linguistic levels. So these first 4 are the pre-symbolic levels. So that's before symbols. And what I see also a lot of times in classrooms is that people are using like Project Core and going with things that like, oh, we've got a communication system, we're showing them objects, we're doing all of these things, and some of our learners aren't ready for that yet. Some of them just haven't gotten to that yet. So let's talk about this pre-symbolic levels and what that looks like. So in level 1, that's think newborn. think newborn with that. That's that pre-intentional behavior. Those are those reflexes that we have when they cry, and we usually go in and we're interpreting those things. We go straight in and we say, oh, you're hungry, or oh, you must be wet, or so we're just guessing, we're interpreting, we're kind of reading what's going on, and we give words to that. We do that with infants without thinking about it. Some of our learners can be 30 and still at this pre-intentional level. We have to stop and think about that. When we do, when those learners are there, that's where we have to be open, and we have to be willing and for them to know that we're there and that we are communication.
Nancy. Uh-oh. Think we might have lost her.
Wait.
Nancy, you froze up big time.
Oh my gosh. Okay, wait a minute. Am I there? Am I back? Hello?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Am I back?
You're all there.
Gotta love living in the backwoods of Tennessee, and sometimes your internet goes out. Let's just keep our fingers crossed. I'm gonna keep going. So in level 2, we interpret those, we're interpreting those behaviors. And these behaviors are happening, but the person, the kid, does not realize that their actions have any kind of a purpose that's going to be communicated to another person. They're just doing it because they're hungry, or they don't want something, or whatever. They're going to do those behaviors, but it's not intentional at all. Level 3 is where we start. This is where intentionality becomes real. And this is where we game on. This is a critical stage, because now the child understands that he has an impact on someone else's behavior. That's where they may grab you and tug on you and pull you over to get something to drink. They may push things away. They may look at you, look at an item, and look back at you, that 3-point gaze, to let you know, hey, you, I want this. You gonna get it for me? So they're doing that kind of thing. That's when but it's still pre-symbolic. There's no symbols. They're not ready for that quite yet. That's where we can start putting those symbols in, because see, this is doing expressive communication. But we all know that you have to have receptive communication many times before we ever can expect to have expressive, right? So we have to stop and think about what is the receptive pieces we need to put in place before we can ever expect them to give it to us expressively. Okay, so level 3 is a really critical stage, because that's where intentionality begins. And when we get to intentionality, then we can really start moving this kid forward. Okay, so level 4, some of our kids with deaf-blindness aren't going to hit this stage. They're not going to do this stage because they don't have the vision. Because these are those conventional behaviors that we would use, like pointing or head nodding, those kind of things that they would see, and that's that incidental piece where they've learned that we point to things when we want them, or we nod our head yes or shake our head no when we mean yes and no. So if they don't see those things, then they may not use them. So don't be upset or worried if you don't have it, if the child has vision loss, okay? So, come on. Now my computer's gonna, there we go. Okay, so then the next five, 6, and 7 are the symbolic levels. That's when we start getting to where we can use symbols and they're using symbols back and forth. In those earlier stages, we're going to supply those symbols, but we're not going to expect them to give them back to us. At these levels is where they're going to start giving them back, okay? This is where we get to that expressive. Level 5 and level 6, in level 5, it's using those concrete symbols that physically resemble what they represent in a way that's obvious to the child. They may look like, feel like, move like, sound like, whatever, smell like what they represent. And therefore it's very concrete, and there's no denying what that is. They know it. Okay, then level 6 is where we get abstract symbols such as speech, manual signs, braille, print words. We may use tangible symbols at this point. All of these symbols may or may not look or feel like what they represent, and they're used one at a time. Okay, sometimes our learners may skip the concrete and go straight into abstract. So it's all right if that happens also. Just keep that in mind. And then the last level is where they start combining those symbols, any sort of symbols, and to order 2 and 3 symbol combinations. So they may be saying things like want juice or me want juice, or, you know, whatever. They're starting to put words and together. And then after that is when they don't need the matrix anymore. We need to find other tools to assess. But the reason why I like the matrix so well is because this does give us a starting place. It gives us a place to once we get past this, I think there are lots of assessment tools and lots of things that we can use that are more typical. But in these early stages, this gives us a starting place of where is this kid? Where are we starting? What are we going to do to help move forward? Okay, so when we do this, it starts with those statements. For those of you who've never done a matrix, it starts with these opening statements, and it's either my child doesn't seem to have real control over his body yet. The only way I know he wants something is because he fusses or whines when he's unhappy or uncomfortable, and he smiles and makes noises or calms down when he's not happy, or when he's happy and comfortable. There we go. Then statement B is my child has control over her own behaviors, but she doesn't use them to try to communicate with me. She doesn't come to me to let me know what she wants, but it's easy for me to figure out because she tries to do things for herself. She knows what she wants, and her behaviors show me that what she wants. If she runs out of something to eat, she'll just go try to get more rather than try to get me to give it to her. And then statement C, my child truly tries to communicate his needs to me. He knows how to get me to do something for him. He uses various gestures and sounds like pointing, shaking his head. He doesn't use any sort of language to communicate. So, or my child lets me know what he wants by using some form of language, symbolic communication. Those are where you start off. So really, statement A, if you start there, that's that level 1, level 2 kid, the level 1 kid. Statement B is more your level 2 child, where they're doing things, you can see what they're doing, but they're not looking at you. And sometimes between B and C, people get confused on where to start because it's that intentionality piece. If they're using you as a communication partner, there's the difference is between B and C. Okay. Okay, so in scoring, we do a lot, they either master it, so they do this independently most of the time when the opportunity arises, and they do this in a number of different places with a number of different people, so you feel like they've got that mastered. And sometimes people will give them a lot more credit than the emerging, which is they do this inconsistently. So they don't do it all the time. They may do it 1 or 2 times. And it's not, maybe in just isolated times. So it's really important when you are filling it out that you stop and think about which one of those statements, if they're doing it a lot of times with a lot of different people in a lot of different places, or if they're just barely doing it or starting it only 1 or 2 times. So, and then symbols, if the child uses symbols either on cards or in devices, score that based on what kind of symbol, if it's a concrete symbol or an abstract symbol. When you finish, you're going to come up with this. It's really important too, I think, when you're filling it out, to use the notes, especially if there's a team of you that's filling it out. And maybe mom says, well, I see that when he's doing such and such and so and so. And maybe at school, we haven't seen it yet. So you want to fill out those notes to make sure that you're capturing, because I think in this piece of it, this is where it's really rich, and it kind of gives you the skill how they're using it. So are they using their facial expression? Are they using conventional gestures or whatever? What kind of behavior does that look like? So what does that facial expression look like? Oh, it's when they frown and grimace. Oh, well, they've mastered that one. So it gives you those things, but those notes are also very important when, so that's capturing from multiple sources. It's not just 1 or 2 people. So when you finish, you have this beautiful little graph that's really helpful, I think, to help parents understand and to help others that aren't as well versed in communication to understand what this child is doing. As you can see, this child is, they've pretty much mastered level 4 up to level 4. There may be a couple of things that they're not using. We might want to look at why they're not using it, or maybe there's no reason for us to get upset about that. In this particular one, they're not using concrete symbols. They just went straight on into abstract symbols. And a lot of these things are emerging. So this is where we'd start with this child. We might go back and look at some of the other things, but for the most part, this is where we're going to go. And I like it because we do get this beautiful picture. Okay, so with that, this is kind of a graph that shows us where our roadmap's going to go. When we look at expressive communication, the matrix takes us up that. We can take those stages of expressive communication, but it's based on, we really have to put those, building a foundation in there to help, sorry about that. We have to have those components, those building a foundation components in there in order for us to move up that. We also have to put into each of, when we're doing this, we have to make sure that we have that receptive communication in place. We have to put that in there so that they can receive this, so that they can move along those expressive stages. With that, we have to look at concept development. and especially for our learners with deaf-blindness, because we know that so many concepts are missing because they haven't seen them, that incidental learning piece. And then literacy just dovetails. Literacy and communication, they both happen at the same time. They both develop along the same continuum, and they're forming at the absolute same time. So it's dovetailing. When you're working on communication, you're also working on literacy. And that's, you know, that's a piece that we can also kind of dive into and look at a little bit. Okay, so with that, there's one thing that my friend, I have a very dear friend that I work with. She's a retired TVI, and she's done lots of work around deaf-blindness. Actually, she'd been working for 30 years when she went back and got her master's in deaf-blindness, because she had that one kid that made her just wonder what to do. And she went back and got a whole nother master's, and then when she retired, she's been doing a whole lot of work with teens and around kids with deaf-blindness. And one of the things that she says, and it's very true, is whatever the child needs, the teen needs. And that's very true. So if a child needs a communication system, then the teen needs to know what to do with that communication system. If, you know, if the child needs a trusting relationship, well, maybe amongst the team, we need a trusting relationship. It's kind of hard to go to your coworkers and say, I'm that OT and I really don't understand everything that you're talking about with communication. You know, we're supposed to be the experts. It's kind of hard to be vulnerable and go, I don't know. I've never had a kid with deaf-blindness. I don't really understand some of the things you're talking about here. So it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, I don't know. I've been working with deaf-blind children for over 30 years, and I still don't know everything. We're not going to know everything. We can always learn something, but it's very important to realize that not everybody on the team is going to know every single thing that we know. We tend to compartmentalize, and I'm the teacher of the deaf. I've got my schedule. I work with this kid Tuesday and Thursday, and I'm only there for 30 minutes. I come in, I do my party piece, and I get out, and I don't really talk to other members of the team. And with these kids, it takes that team. It takes everybody's head. It takes everybody understanding. And not only our piece, I need to understand as that teacher of the deaf, and I'm coming in to a child with deaf blindness, I need to understand that blindness piece. I need to understand what that child sees or what that child doesn't see, or if I need to know from that OT, how does their sensory system work? What am I going to get the best thing? So we really do need to work as teams and start talking to each other and sharing, because that's the only way that we're really going to understand these kids and how to move forward. So with that, we're going to talk logistics. Do we have any questions before I stop sharing? No?
And I think we're done.
Yes.
And early. You guys can leave 10 minutes early.
I know. That's always good, isn't it? Just enjoy.